Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great America Show. It's great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday night in America. Beautiful day. Not a beautiful day for Ukraine's President, Vladimir Zelensky. Zelensky was at the White House today after meeting with some members of Congress and senators on Capitol Hill, where he's here to make a mineral deal where he's going to sign over some of the mineral rights that Ukraine has. Although it didn't turn out according to plan. Take a listen to just a short clip of the meeting, the 10-plus long meeting that was aired out for the media to listen between J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, and Zelensky.
Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning.
I know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't
in
been
this
alone.
cabinet,
you
and
haven't
not
been
only
alone.
in this cabinet.
We gave you, through the stupid president, $350 billion.
You voted
we gave
for
you
your
military
president.
equipment, and
voted
you men
for
are
your
brave,
president.
but they had to use our military.
Yes. What about
if you didn't have our military equipment,
you invited
if
me
you
to
didn't
speak.
have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
It's sad that the people of Ukraine have to deal with that imbecile, that idiot who's getting the country further into a war that Vladimir Putin, frankly, is ready to end. So now it sits on Zelensky. He has the chance for a ceasefire. He has a chance for this thing to be completely over for his people, to not have another person, another life lost, and not another child, another military member, and not another wife. No more deaths. And Zelensky comes to Washington, D.C. and puts on that act. What a shame. Needless to say, the press conference that was supposed to take aim after following that Oval Office visit was canceled as President Trump asked Zelensky to leave the White House and told him to come back when he's ready to negotiate and end this war. Zelensky leaving the White House, doing a little grandstanding on Twitter, tweeting out the following: "Thank you, America. Thank you for your support. Thank you for this visit. Thank you at POTUS, Congress, and the American people. Ukraine needs just a lasting peace, and we are ready, working exactly for that." But that's not true. Zelensky doesn't want peace. If Zelensky wanted peace, he would have came to the White House today, signed the mineral rights deal, and we would have ended this thing. The thing could have probably been ended by the end of or the beginning of next week. Yet Zelensky leaves the White House on very, very bad terms. And the truth of the matter is there is no Ukraine without America. There's no deal without America. President Trump has been very outspoken on what he wants. He wants peace. He wants this thing ended. He wants the fighting stopped. He wants the lives lost to stop. That's not too much to ask for. But Zelensky's hesitancy to stop the war, I think it tells you everything you need to know about where Zelensky's mind is right now and how he wants this thing to keep going so he can continue to bring in billions and billions of dollars, risking more lives than it's even worth. Absolutely disgusting. Folks, our guest today, one you know very, very well from this show, John Solomon. He's editor-in-chief of Just the News. He's also the host of Just the News, No Noise on Real America's Voice. He joins us today. John, it's great to have you here on the Great America Show. I appreciate you joining us. You were one of Lou Dobbs' favorite guests, and you were instrumental, John, in getting us started in this whole podcasting world. So hats off to you, and we appreciate everything you've done. And I appreciate personally everything you've done.
I miss the big guy an awful lot, but I know his show is in really, really good hands. And it's an honor to be back on, and it's great to be talking to you, John.
I appreciate that, John, the kind words. Let's get started. I mean, there's so much to talk about today, but obviously the news of the day, Zelensky leaves the White House after apparently being thrown out by Donald Trump. No press conference happening tonight. What the hell's going on?
Well, I think we saw it in full stream, which is that Zelensky wanted to come here and show the world that he would stand up to President Trump. But the problem is there's no one else that has invested more than $200 billion in the Ukraine war except the United States of America. There's nobody that has the military might to take on Russia should Ukraine need it. We saw that yesterday. Great Britain couldn't answer the question, could they take on Russia by themselves? We know the answer. The answer is no. And there's nobody that brought Vladimir Putin to the point of potentially making a deal where he's willing to give land back, maybe put some money into reconstruction, allow for a demilitarized zone with peacekeepers, than Donald Trump. And why President Zelensky would come here and bite the hand that had those three cards in it is a little odd. My guess is it's a breakup before a makeup, and that Zelensky will eventually come back. But I think we have to look at what happened in the lead up to this event. Donald Trump had an unbelievably warm meeting with the most liberal prime minister Great Britain's had in a long time, Prime Minister Starmer. And Starmer sounded like he was on board with Donald Trump's plan. He said, listen, we got to put more European money in security. That happened beforehand. President Trump was with the French President Macron. Macron could not be more on board in talking about the historic opportunity that Donald Trump opened. The people that Zelensky would normally turn to if he was going to get into a tiff with President Trump, France and England and Germany, appear to be more on Donald Trump's side than Zelensky's romantic vision of, hey, let's keep this war going and see how many more people can die. I think Zelensky has no dealing hand, and he was testing the limits of the president, and he hit them pretty quickly, and he got kicked out. I think Zelensky thought, wow, he wants this mineral deal so bad, he'll do anything for me. And the answer is no, he's not that sort of guy. That's not the art of the deal for Donald Trump.
$350 billion is a lot of money to send to another country, but I think in the grand scheme of things, John, with how much money we've spent on way dumb things in this country, Donald Trump is willing to write it off as a loss if he's not going to spend another dollar in this country. And I don't think Zelensky sees that the way it was. And I mean, you see Zelensky pull up there, John, not in a suit and tie, in his stupid outfit. Donald Trump even commenting on it when he gets out the car. And, Donald Trump is sitting there using an analogy saying the cards are not in your hand. And Zelensky, in his sarcastic way, says, I'm not playing cards. He came here, it seems like you'd said, to see where Trump is, but also to make it like I'm the boss. In no situation, John, does he win this war. That's the bottom line, I think. And I think we've all realized, right? So what he's getting right now is a concession. It's not in Vladimir Putin's best interest to stop this thing. Because if he wanted to, John, the truth of the matter is he could take all of Ukraine. He doesn't want all of Ukraine. He would have taken it already, right? He would have moved into Kyiv and pushed further to the west. He doesn't want it. He wanted what he originally wanted. And I think he's at the point now where he says, okay, enough is enough. Yeah. But now you've got this man, John, who's gotten $350 billion allegedly. That's the number. And he's got a ceasefire, which he's been calling for. And Donald Trump calls his bluff. I mean, how does the rest of the world perceive this now as a man that they said was modern day Churchill?
We're gonna find out quickly, but rest of the key people who matter, the England and Frances and Germans of the world, the president already has briefed them on what the deal is. And when Germany hears that Russia's willing to give some of the land back, that they're willing to put some money towards reconstruction, that they're willing to accept a European peacekeepers in a demilitarized zone, they're like, hey, that's better than we thought Putin would give, right? And so I think they're looking at like, well, what is Zelensky holding out for? And I think how France and Great Britain reacts to this in the next 24 hours will tell us a lot about where this goes. But I think the president said something profound. This is the most important quote that came out during the middle of the shouting match. You either make a deal or we are out. The United States is not going to support you. Without our weaponry, Ukraine couldn't fight a much smaller country. And I think at this point, they're also out of men. They're running out of men quickly. And I think that Donald Trump just laid down a red line, and Zelensky's got to go back and think, wait a second, he just said, if I don't make a deal, they're out. Where am I going to turn to? Where's the weaponry? And the answer is there is no one going to give the weaponry.
The other thing, too, John, is the whole NATO proposition, which is probably why Britain's on board and France is on board, because there really is no NATO without America. And I've been saying this. We may be out of NATO, John, before this war is even finished between Ukraine and Russia, which is what the media's premise of what this war started. Do you have any sort of different inclination on why this thing started, dating back to maybe 2014, some timeline around then when it originated? I think it's
I think this all begins when I cover some of this in my book from 2020 Fallout. The Obama administration thought they were going to appease Russia. And so they did this reboot with Russia, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. They ingratiated themselves and gave Russia lots of things, nuclear energy contracts in America. And in return, the Democrats got rich themselves. Bill Clinton gets that $500,000 speech fee, and lots of Democrats are making business with Russia. And then the United States thought, well, we're so nice now with Russia. I think we should push out their guy in Ukraine because our Democratic donors don't like the president at the time. because he was too aligned with Russia, and they tried to play that hand. And the United States probably played a role in throwing out Viktor Yanukovych, the president at the time, who was the democratically elected, legitimately elected leader of Ukraine. And Russia, like, wait a second, that's not the America we were just dealing with. And that triggers a war. And I think the most important thing Donald Trump could do over the next several weeks, as America absorb what happened today and as they absorb the next steps in this fight with Ukraine, is to reveal whether the United States played a role, whether the CIA or the State Department or other intelligence agencies played a role in throwing out one of our allies' own elected leaders. We don't throw out people in Democrat countries just because we don't like where they are. If we did, and I don't know if we did, there's certainly some strong inclinations that we did. Bob Woodward's book talks about some interesting things that hint at it. There was an intercept of a conversation between Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt. Jeffrey Pyatt, the Kiev U.S. ambassador at the time, Nuland, the architect of this failed Ukraine policy. If we played a role in that, that probably is the trigger for what then happens. So the Maidan Revolution was not really of the Ukrainian people. If it was U.S. inspired or U.S. funded, then the last 10 years have been an unnecessary disaster because the United States made a bad diplomatic move. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened yet, because we don't know, but I think the president could answer that question. And if he did, we would know it's either Russian propaganda or it's true. And whichever is true, it can help us understand how to navigate the next 10 years. And I think it's important for our allies to know what role we played. But whatever that history is now, the moment is here. And, it's interesting to watch how the media has looked at this. But Politico had a headline out right away, and I think it's the right way to look at what happened. Disaster for Ukraine in the Oval Office. I think Zelensky overplayed his hand, and it's a disaster for Ukraine because there's nowhere to go. They need the United States. And there's not this deal looks like it could be something that Ukraine could get far better than where it stands now with. It's a head scratcher why Zelensky would do it. Either it's ego or he misread the room, but whatever the case is, I suspect that Zelensky will calm down and come back and make the right deal, because the alternative is no U.S. and a lot more death in Ukraine.
Yeah, he's got no other plans. I think it was probably a big ego thing. The other thing, John, and you perhaps know about this just as much as the great Lou Dobbs did, because you guys covered this forever. And it was, it didn't really dawn on me until last night. I was watching CNN. Caitlin Collins had on Gordon Sondland, another famous figure in this whole situation. And it made me think back about the connection that Donald Trump was impeached. And it dawned on me a little bit further today when Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office and said, all we want is a thank you. And I'm sitting there waiting for the Democrats to come out and say, it's a quid pro quo. He wants to thank you. He's asking.
I don't think they can play that card a second time. I might be wrong, but they might try it because they got
no.
But yeah.
But Don, nobody is talking about what Donald Trump's whole problem was with Ukraine the first time. It's the corruption. The corruption didn't go away.
And it was Democrat corruption. Listen, the Democrats have used Ukraine as a piggy bank for their American politics. Victor Pinchuk, one of the largest donors to the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton machinery. This has been a piggy bank. George Soros, long interested in Ukraine, though he's not a Ukrainian, he's a Hungarian, but he's had long, vast interest in Ukraine. And right after the Maidan Revolution of 2014, he announced he was going to go in and make a big investment in Ukraine. So he was leveraged business there. The Democrats have an allegiance to Ukraine that has more to do with their political alliances than the good of the country. Just think about what the Democratic Party did for Ukraine over the last 30 years. It made it give up its nuclear weapons, which would have been a heck of a deterrent for Russia. It then destabilized the country in 2014, didn't provide any military support, and then it sold the false hope that Ukraine would be a NATO member. The NATO charter definition of what a NATO country should be doesn't apply to Ukraine. Ukraine touches Russia. NATO was never designed to be an entry point for those that actually are on the border with Russia. So they've sold these false things because that's what their funders wanted. But it's not been what's been good for the Ukrainian people.
Yeah, but John, if you speak like the way you're speaking and I'm speaking right now, we're accused of being Russian agents. If people just went back and look at the history of things, Donald Trump should have never been impeached over the Ukrainian phone call. And I think things would have been a lot different than they're panning out to be right now. Before we move on, before we head to break, what do you think the timeline is on this? Zelensky goes back to Ukraine today. When can we expect to hear from the fella again about what he wants to do?
It's hard to say. I think if Zelensky leaves the United States, his ability to get back into the negotiating table may be harder and more difficult. I think Donald Trump will let a little bit more time pass and not just suddenly engage. And Ukraine without U.S. resources will be far more weakened quicker. And then maybe Putin doesn't want to give up as much as he's willing to give up now. I think Zelensky might want to stay in town, take a quick poll of his European allies, and maybe re-gauge and reassess. And, he could look like the hero by coming back and saying, I calmed down and I'm sorry, Mr. President, let's work on something. That's probably a bigger win for him. But there's probably some people in his ear. There are some European Union diplomats that think that Putin doesn't really want a peace deal. I think he does. I think my gut tells me from what he's offering that it's a real legitimate deal. I'm not a fan of Putin. Putin was the aggressor here. He violated international law. Putin wanted one time to give me an interview. I said, no, I didn't want it. There is, because, it was a propaganda interview at the time and it came with strictures that I wouldn't accept. Yeah. I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin's. I recognize he's the aggressor here, but in war, the person who's winning ends up in a stronger position than the person that's losing. And Donald Trump was trying to rebalance that and give Ukraine a fighting chance. Yeah. And I don't think Zelensky can afford to leave the United States, or it'll be a longer delay towards peace.
Well, so you're saying the matter of days. The crazy thing, John, before we go to break here, Donald Trump's been in politics for a really long time, but really the last 10 years, in the power of the president and running for president. And I've never heard him get that heated in a meeting before with any world leader. I mean, what does that tell you about how fed up with this guy he is? Yeah.
Listen, it's interesting. I think what drives President Trump on this is not even the personality conflict with the comedian turned president. It's he can't stand to see men and women in Ukrainian uniform run into a battlefield every day and just get blown up because they don't have the capability of winning. He said it many times. He said it to me personally. He hates to see unnecessary waste of life in war. If there's a meaning or there's a purpose or there's an end game to it, okay, let's do it. But he doesn't see it, and he has said, I've looked at some of these reconnaissance satellite photos, and it makes me sick to see how many people are dying in a battle where the battle lines move a mile on each other. They're not moving anywhere. Yeah. I think he just wants to end the carnage, and I think that Zelensky has to maybe recalculate where Donald Trump stands from.
Yeah, completely unnecessary. Folks, we're talking with, you guys already know who John Solomon is, but he's the editor-in-chief of justthenews.com, our number one source of news here. He's also the host of Just the News, No Noise. You can catch him each and every night on Real America's Voice. We're coming right back with John. Stay with us. I want to get John's take on what's going on in the FBI and what's going on in the DOJ and where are these Epstein files? We're coming right back with John. Stay with us.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. Queen size only $59.98. Kings only $69.98. They sell out fast every year, so order now. Save 20% on our brand new My Crosses. They're designed in the likeness of the one I've worn every day for over 20 years. They come in men's and women's, and they're made right here in the USA. Get our 2025 six-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. Our initial quantities are extremely low, so get them now before they go. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, just $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our first ever mega sale. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Well, that ship is sail because right now, every order ships absolutely free.
Folks, we're back with John Solomon of justthenews.com, our number one source of news. You can catch him each and every night. Just the News, No Noise on Real America's Voice. John, you know this, as I say this about many things because you're very in the loop on everything. The FBI and the DOJ. So Pam Bondi comes out 2 nights ago and says she's releasing these documents, knowing damn well that it wasn't all the documents. There was about 200 pages, John.
They knew it was a nothing burger. They knew it was a nothing burger.
So why, let me ask you this question. Why does Pam Bondi come out as her first big test as Attorney General and do this and this big dump with these influencers instead of just taking a step back, John, and saying, you know what, we're going to have to delay. People would have been pissed about the delay, but they would have said, okay, it might be worth it in the end. Whose calculation is this that completely missed?
Yeah, I think this is on Pam Bondi's team. I think the White House was caught off guard. My intel is that the White House had no idea she was going to do what she did yesterday. Yeah. These influencers were there for some other reasons, and she hijacked it, is what I'm told, or her team hijacked it, I should say. And, these influencers went in with the belief they were getting something meaningful. They went out and said positive things, and then they realized, oh my gosh, there's nothing in this. These are all old documents, which, by the way, I'm certain I've confirmed the Justice Department and FBI knew these were basically documents previously released. With the exception, there's one document that's new. There is a evidence list of things that the FBI hasn't turned over. I think that's important. It gives us some sense of what we might be able to get in the future. Right. But the whole optics was strange. They took friends of the White House and had them go out and be shills for something that they then get savaged. Take a look at Jack Posobiec's and DC Drano's Twitter things. They're getting savaged for having fallen for this ruse. It was an amateurish thing and an otherwise pretty successful start to the Trump presidency. What they could have done is, hey, this is what the FBI claimed they found. This is a joke. We looked at it. It's all old stuff except for this one document. And we're so determined now that this is what they claim. We're going back and we're going to go get the American people what it is and watch how we do it. That would have been a winning moment. But they tried to fake it for something it wasn't, and it immediately boomeranged on them. And I think they wasted some credibility on their own home turf, and they made a mockery of the other side. Gave free shots at it. The FBI really was dragged along for this. I think Kash Patel is the person who was digging and looking for those missing documents, helped uncover them recently. And that's missing. You don't get that sense from the letter, but Kash Patel and his team were the people that found the documents that had not been responsive previously, and they were working to get those. There were so many different ways they could have played this that would have been credibility building, but I think at the end of the day, they chose a credibility eroding. Now, is it a big deal? Will people remember it 7 days? But no, probably not. Maybe some of the influencers will, because they're getting savage. They'll be a little more careful next time. But I think at the end of the day, they'll get these documents. And when there is one very important document in there, there's a 3-page list of documents and evidence that was gathered at Epstein's home. And there's even talk of a money with an envelope with money in it. Is that money because for sex for women, or was it money for a blackmail because he owned stuff? Those are important questions we could get answered in the next round. And I suspect the next round of releases of documents, whether it's JFK, RFK, MLK, or Epstein 2, they'll be done in a little different manner. And I think at the end of the day, this was just stage managed by some people. May not have even been Pam Bondi, right? It might have been people below her feeding the AG. AG is very busy. So the AG could just got fed a line of bologna, but they made a bad sandwich of it. And I think they hurt the credibility yesterday. They made a mockery of what's generally a real commitment to transparency in this presidency.
The thing that's mind-blowing to me, John, is 200 documents. Pam Bondi was the Attorney General of Florida. He knows damn well, John.
Yeah, there's no chance that's the last of the documents, right? Yeah, you and I would know that like in 2 seconds.
John, you get more than 200 documents on like a petty larceny crime file. I mean, that's the thing that's so mind-blowing to me. How many, in your opinion, how many documents do you think there are?
I will guess that there are about 25 to 35,000 pieces of evidence. That includes documents, envelopes, pictures, photos, books. And there's another thing when you listen to Pam Bondi that's important to see. And also when you look at this original set of documents, they're redacting anything that went before the grand jury or involves the Privacy Act, which means most of the good stuff is going to be behind those little black lines that drive us nuts. And even in these first documents that were released, they were heavily redacted. Some of the documents are meaningless. They're probably meaningful documents, but they're meaningless to the American people because everything's redacted. So this is not going to be a full act of transparency, even when we get all the documents. But there are laws about grand jury material being released. There are laws about Privacy Act information. There still could be a significant amount of information we can learn. And I think, increasingly, lawmakers I've talked to in Congress who've never been willing to say this before, though they've thought it, but have said it on my show in the last few weeks. One of the questions we need to examine, doesn't mean it happened, but we need to know the answer, is when the government came in possession of this incriminating evidence, or while Epstein had it before he was in the confines of the U.S. government's custody, was it used to leverage businessmen or politicians? Because it's embarrassing stuff. That's a really important national security question. And I think that's a journey we can all go on together and get answers to. But the FBI has to start cooperating better. And Kash Patel personally intervened to find these documents. They're on his desk now. It'll take a week or two to go through them, make sure that what's appropriate, and make sure there's no lead information that they haven't followed that they should still investigate. But Kash Patel and his FBI are going to get these documents out. And hopefully the next time it'll be done without the Justice Department's sort of, awkward stage management, I guess is the way to look at it.
John, the one of the documents they released yesterday was a black book, which had been out. I looked back in my email because I had sent it to Lou.
I've seen it. Yeah.
Right, the unredacted version, and I looked. I sent it to Lou in December of 2023.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, I mean, that's crazy. Now that's the
came out in the civil case that came out of the criminal case against Maxwell, and I think this was. And listen, the FBI knew that this wasn't big information. I think the way it got spun by the Justice Department was unfortunate. Maybe it was a young aide. Maybe it was the Attorney General herself. I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. I don't know which one it was, but whoever was responsible for it, it disserved the cause of transparency that President Trump and Susie Wiles and Pam Bondi, I know, to be committed to. And we know Kash Patel, look what he did to get the Russiagate documents out. They had a bad day. They stubbed their toe. Now let's hope that next time they come back and do it better for the American people.
No, I'm talking to a few people about this. One of them recently, Tony Schaefer. I don't know if you know.
I know Tony really well. Yeah.
I had Tony on the other day, and we were talking about this. John, in my opinion, the only thing that should be redacted in these documents is victims' names, people who have been victimized from this, right? Yeah. Everyone who was involved in this, it's fair game. The way I look at it is he's a private citizen. He wasn't a government employee or any type of that we know about. Right. So why would there be any sorts of redactions? Number one. Number two, Tony is a very firm believer that Epstein wasn't just working for foreign governments. He was a tool of the United States government on the payroll of the United States government.
We need to find that out. We need to find out. Haven't been able to prove it. I mean, certainly people have suspected it, and it would make some sense. Maybe it would even explain why the first deal was such a sweetheart deal, because he really got off easy in the first case. But there's a whole nother, plausibility, which is that pressure was applied in that first case, and we should get to the bottom of that. Were prosecutors under pressure not to go more aggressively because it would embarrass people across the globe or in the United States? These are things that the transparency could. Now, on the issue, I'm a journalist, so I want the maximum amount of transparency. I always argue and I fight for it, and sometimes I sue for it. Many times I've sued for it in the last few years to get information. There are some specific laws. If a piece of evidence was only gathered under a grand jury subpoena, known as 6E power, and it was not gathered previously for that, and it was only presented to the grand jury and never was in a court file or public proceeding, the law requires that it remain redacted. That's called grand jury secrecy. It's something we've all lived with as journalists. Now, if the FBI gathered it beforehand and then the grand jury just subpoenaed it to get it into its thing, the FBI could then give that document up and just give the version that wasn't sent to the grand jury. And one of the things that Kash Patel's team is doing now is going through this new batch of documents they found in the Southern District of New York and finding out, all right, this looks like it went to the grand jury, but did we have it before the grand jury? Could we release it in the form before the grand jury? I think the FBI will achieve some pretty significant transparency, but there are some strictures about under current laws. You could actually be prosecuted for releasing 6E grand jury material. So there are some things, and I think when you heard Pam say we're going to release everything, that wasn't ever really going to be true. There are laws that say you can't release certain things. So we'll see where it ends up. I think we're going to learn a lot more, but we're not going to get 100% visibility because that's just the way the law works. We're going to learn a lot more if the FBI does its job in next round. And these first round of documents were gathered before Kash was really on the scene. He's on the scene now, and I think you're going to see a different type of release in the next batch.
You mentioned the first sweetheart deals. This thing, a lot of people don't realize this thing started around 2005, 2006.
Yeah, it's under George W. Bush. Yeah.
Under George W. Bush, but more importantly, John, under AG Pam Bondi of the great state of Florida. So it starts in 2005, John, as a case that's brought to the Palm Beach Police Department.
That's right.
People were very pissed off about how things transpired from 2005 to 2006. Yep. 2006, the FBI gets involved. Now, back to what you had said, what you've been trying to find out, and what Tony Schaefer had alluded to.
Yeah.
If he is a government employee, a government informant, whatever you want to call him, would Pam Bondi know about this, being she was the Attorney General of Florida while they're looking into this guy?
It's if he was a federal informant, the feds probably would not have told the state. They usually keep that stuff really tight. Like, look how hard it was to find out who the informants were in Russia collusion, right? I mean, we had to squeeze that out for months to learn about Christopher Steele and his, and then you couldn't find out he was even connected to Hillary Clinton, which was like the most important part of the whole story. The informant identities are protected because the next informant might not come in if the last informant got burned or made public. And so there's a culture. I think what ultimately happens from my reporting and having interviewed a lot of the people who worked that case back in 06, 07, 09, is that the state looked at it. It had a lot of interstate trafficking, which means it's really got more juice and more penalty at the federal level. The feds come in and Bigfoot the state, right? And say, we're in charge here. And then the U.S. attorney there gave him a sweetheart deal, a deal that a lot of people think could have been far more aggressive. And I think that is an area that we don't know. Now, sometimes someone gets a sweetheart deal because they're now going to be on the payroll after the fact, right? We're going to let you off light and you're going to inform for us. Maybe that's part of the deal. We're told it's not, but we ought to look into that. Maybe it was just a bad call by federal prosecutors who we know make a lot of bad calls. We've seen them in the last 10 years with Russia collusion and other cases. There's a lot we don't know. I don't think that Pam Bondi is in the business of trying to give us a lack of accountability because she might look bad. I think she's sincerely trying to get the stuff. I think what happened was she didn't have what she thought she had. And rather than just come out and say it, they tried to make it look like something else. And that never works in Washington. Right. It never works anywhere, to be honest with you.
Right. And you got so many, John, we're all so invested. It's the most invested I've ever seen private citizen, the average human being. And it's all because I think of Twitter that, we're all pissed off about this. I want to turn to something another thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that James Comey, it's crazy that you constantly hear the same names, John. Constantly for the last 20 years. Comey,
they keep coming up, don't they?
Right. So
That's true.
James Comey and his offspring, Maureen Comey, was responsible, I believe, the lead prosecutor for the Southern District of New York in none other than the Jeffrey Epstein case. How does this happen? Do you think she's playing any role in the stonewalling and covering up or deletion of documents?
We don't know, and I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone until we get to the bottom of it. I do think who played a role in hiding this batch of documents, forcing the director himself to get involved to find them. By the way, this is a bad use of the director's time, right? We're facing some of the biggest terrorist threats in our history, maybe even more severe than before 9/11. And we got to have a director because he can't trust his rank and file in certain offices to go out and get these documents. It's a bad long time use of his thing. Now he's going to fix this, right? And the way he fixes it is get the documents, put them out, and then any and everyone who played a role in hiding this should be prosecuted for obstruction of justice or fired for refusing to provide information to the American public. Remember, these documents are also subpoenaed by Congress. Now, why is that important? It's a crime to hide something intentionally from Congress. So there could be criminal prosecutions from people. Who it is, it's too early to tell. And often the early assumptions about what we learn are not there. I want to follow the trail. We're digging really hard, and we're going to get more evidence and more information on this over the next few weeks. And when we know what really went on, we're going to tell the American people, like we did on Russia collusion with you and Lou, and what we learned about Hunter Biden. We got that out, the whistleblowers. There is a great, big story behind us. I'm just not sure what it is yet. We got to keep digging.
Real quick, John, before we go to break here, do you think we ever find out who actually killed Jeffrey Epstein and was it really himself?
Right now, the official conclusion is he killed himself, and then he may have killed himself with the complicity of maybe some people in the prison who were going to look the other way. If you were used to the good life for a very long time, and now you're in a cell like Rikers and other places, you become depressed pretty quickly. Prison is a really bad place, and maybe right now the preponderance of evidence looks like it's a suicide. But that doesn't mean that everything should be reevaluated where we are. There are some things that occurred that night that should never have occurred in the prison system. And you have to ask yourself, why did they occur? And I don't think we've ever gotten good answers for that. But, the official ruling's there. There isn't a whole lot of evidence other than good, healthy suspicion to counter it. But this is the moment where we should be able to get all that out. We should listen, every agency that has something on Epstein, which includes the CIA, which gets a pass right now. What has the CIA got in this guy? This guy traveled the globe. Was he working for the CIA? Businessmen that have far-reaching contacts in the globe often get contacted by the CIA. So I think the CIA and the DNI and the FBI and the Justice Department and the Attorney General's office in Florida all owe us the transparency that we've been promised.
I think one thing we've learned, John, if not many other things over the last 8 years, is there's only so many coincidences that can happen before it's like, maybe this isn't a coincidence anymore. Maybe he didn't kill himself. Maybe.
And that tendency, you're onto something. That tendency to be suspicious has been heightened by the fact that we were given such false stories like Hunter Biden's laptop is Russian disinformation. Baloney. It never was. And so our heightened reason to be more suspicious and to be more dubious has been earned by the bad actions of the government in the past 10 years. And so we're all more suspicious. That said, I always think that facts are a stubborn thing, and that's how we've been able to turn so many of these stories working with you and Lou. And I think that we should follow the same path in this. Let's get the facts, fight until we have every fact out, and then we'll make a really good judgment.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. John, I want to take one more quick break here before we hit our final segment. On the other side of this quick break, I want to take up those Russiagate documents that you fought so hard to get. I want to take up the 2020 election, the relitigation of it, and what can possibly happen. A lot of people lost their jobs over it, John. A lot of people lost their lives over talking about a stolen election. I want to get your take on that. And I also want to get your take on what else President Trump and Pam Bondi should be declassifying. We're talking with John Solomon of justthenews.com. He's also the host of Just the News, No Noise on Real America's Voice. You can catch him each and every night. We're coming right back. Stay with us.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. Queen size only $59.98. Kings only $69.98. They sell out fast every year, so order now. Save 20% on our brand new My Crosses. They're designed in the likeness of the one I've worn every day for over 20 years. They come in men's and women's, and they're made right here in the USA. Get our 2025 six-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. Our initial quantities are extremely low, so get them now before they go. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, just $14.98. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our first ever mega sale. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Well, that ship is sailed because right now, every order ships absolutely free.
Folks, we're back with John Solomon of justthenews.com. John, on President Trump's last day in office, you were instrumental in the declassification of documents that never wound up getting declassified, even though President Trump declassified them.
Well, they got declassified. They just didn't get released. That's the sad part. Yeah.
Right. So, and those are the Russiagate documents, the premise of of Donald Trump's demise in his administration and what made his life total hell. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what happened on that day, John, the process that played out and where we are right now in it?
Yeah, I have sworn this out under penalty of perjury in a case where I'm fighting to get those documents. The president contacted me, and I had a brief meeting with him at the White House, and I had told him and had written in public what I believe should be released for history and for the American
When
people.
was this, John?
This would have been a couple days before the president left. I can't remember. I'd probably been the 19th, 18th, 19th, whenever it was.
2021.
Yeah. And the president had been saying for weeks, I'm going to do it. He brought me over and said, I've done it, and you're going to get to see them in a few days. And I thought that was really exciting. And then the night of the 19th, Mark Meadows, the then White House chief of staff, called me and said the president has executed the declassification order. Because the documents had been classified, I actually asked to see the declassification. I wanted to make sure I wasn't being given something that then I'd get arrested for by the Biden administration the next day. I was shown the actual order, which then showed up the next day in the Federal Register. And then Mark Meadows said, in a little while, we'll send the documents over to you. And he sent a batch over with an embargo on them, meaning that these can't be used until noon on Tuesday. And so I didn't look at those documents because they were embargoed. I had a team of reporters that was instructed to begin looking at them and scan them and put them out for the American public, but under the terms of an embargo. Embargo is a very specific thing that journalists use. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have agreed to the embargo, but that's the way it was been done by the president. It's his documents. I agreed to it. Within an hour or so of that process beginning, I got a second set of documents. It was a small set from the larger set. I looked at them. They were pretty good, pretty important stuff. Things on the informants and things that actually have had profound effect in civil cases because people have used them in real court cases. And I went out and wrote those. And while I was writing those, Mark Meadows called my team and said, hey, the FBI made a mistake on some documents. I need to take them back, make some corrections. We'll bring them back the next morning because they were still under embargo. Journalists agreed to that sort of thing. We sent them back with the pure hope that they would be back in a few hours, and they just never came back. And then the National Archives knows. Now, the set I did get proved to be some of the most important documents that we learned, because we learned significant things about how much the FBI knew that George Papadopoulos and Carter Page were not biting on all these efforts to make them look like Russia. They were doing the opposite. George Papadopoulos like, I wouldn't do that. That's un-American. And Carter Page would say, I'm not in bed with Russia. I'm not going to do that. We're loyalists. We're patriots in the Trump campaign. Right. So the FBI knew as they were bringing this investigation along, the very targets that they had opened up on were not doing anything improper, illegal, inappropriate. And yet they managed to continue that investigation. That stuff that wasn't even in the congressional report or in the IG report. So those documents were really valuable. And they show, some of these informants coming back saying it's just not there. It's not true. And so there was also some evidence that one of the informants did not tell the FBI the truth about Mike Flynn. And they found out that informant had not given him an accurate story. Did they get rid of the informant? No. So the FBI didn't seem to care about bad information. They just wanted information that made Donald Trump look bad, and they weren't getting it. Those documents are very important. I've written about them. Every one of them are in the public domain. But the rest of the documents, which may not even be as interesting as the ones I got, I think I might have got the best hits. The National Archives kept, and then in defiance of the president's order, they did not release them. They sent them to the National Archives, and they kept them away from me. And for the last 4 years, I've been suing to try to get them. And Judge Leon in Washington, D.C. wouldn't give them to me. And so we're appealing that. And maybe Donald Trump and Kash Patel could short circuit that and just send me the documents one more time. This time I won't take them on embargo. I would go write them and get them out.
That's so insane, John. You've been doing this for a very, very long time. Have you ever heard, witnessed, or seen exactly what had happened to you? I've never.
Many times embargo things get pulled back.
No, not the embargoed, but then take them and never give them back.
Yeah, no. It was and I know Mark Meadows feels bad about it. I think in his belief, the FBI really was just going to fix something specific. The Privacy Act, the thing we were talking about, that is a real thing. And I don't want to violate the Privacy Act. So, everyone acted in good intention except the FBI and the National Archives, which played keep away for the last few years. And at the end of the day, the president of the United States, lawfully elected with the power he was given, declassified and ordered them released. And the deep state chose not to release them. I think that is an extraordinary thing. And by the way, the government does not say that Joe Biden reclassified him. Isn't like a president came in and reclassified him. That bureaucrats chose to ignore a lawful order from a lawfully elected president. And that's why when you say, is there a deep state? Well, this is a pretty good example of what a deep state might look like.
That's mind-blowing. I never knew that that's what happened. That's crazy.
I've sworn it out, and I've provided all the evidence in the court. It's well documented what happened.
The problem is, John, you're probably one of the very few honest people in this industry. There were probably people who would have taken those documents and said, go to hell. They were declassified. They were given to me. See you later.
Yeah. I followed the rules because those are the rules. And when you give someone your word is your bond. And so we follow that. Now, I was lucky that night to get two subsets of documents. And I'm pretty certain from what I've known and from the reporting I'm doing that the subset I did get are probably the most important documents. I did get a copy of the fourth FISA warrant, but it still had heavy redactions. And I still think there is a single paragraph in the fourth FISA that's public now that could be potentially explosive. It seems to appear to address a tactic and how they spied on the president that doesn't look like anything that we've known about, but it's all redacted. But my belief is that this President 47 Trump and this FBI director, Kash Patel, could declassify that one paragraph. And I think people might be surprised. There might have still been one other spy tactic deployed against Donald Trump that we don't know about yet. Not talking about a honeypot, but maybe some other possible thing. And I hope this president and this FBI director fulfill the promise of the last president, Trump, and get these out to the American public. We deserve it for history.
You mentioned honeypot, so I've got to ask you what Tony Schaefer asked me the other day. Yeah. Have you ever heard of brownstoning?
No, I haven't until, well, I mean, I've heard of it recently. Yes, but no, it isn't a term. Now, there is, as you know, particularly during the Cold War, this was not an uncommon tactic used, particularly during the Cold War. And certainly the Soviets and Russians used it. That's how they compromised an FBI agent. And we had one of the greatest spy scandals in history. But I'm not been able to get the level of detail that some other people have on this. And so I'm a little cautious on seeing whether this actually happened. There could have been an earlier operation to test the loyalties of Donald Trump and some of his aides. I've always suspected that because we see activity in March, April, in May that precede in 2016, the official start. And I do think there was an earlier operation that would be what we call loyalty testing. By the way, that's a common tactic that the FBI sometimes uses. Whether there's a honeypot element to that, I have not been able to get confirmation. And I have pretty good sources, but we're keeping to work on it. I know there's one whistleblower claiming it. There are others who seem to have some access to it that say, I don't think that's what went on, but there was, there probably was some loyalty testing going on. That's not surprising. The FBI sometimes to root out counterintelligence threats in America will run someone up to make sure that someone hasn't been compromised, and they come back and find out, no, that person's fine. And then they do the right thing. They drop off and they don't do it again. That could very well have happened because in 15 and 16, after the Obama administration flipped on Russia, they got all the riches from Russia, and then they turned around and flipped on Russia. Russia would naturally be looking at the other party now, the Republicans, to see if maybe could we find some friends there because we were treated so badly. So the FBI doing loyalty testing or false flagging just to make sure that there weren't spies in the U.S. government, that's probably a legitimate thing we shouldn't be concerned about. Opening up a fake criminal investigation on President Trump and his aides, well, that's a line that's way too far over.
John, another issue before we wrap up here that you know a lot about is the 2020 election, relitigation of it. Lou Dobbs was canceled from Fox News. Now, we don't know if that was the exact reason, but the timing, as I said, coincidences, John, just seem to not be coincidences anymore. Yeah. Tucker Carlson was eventually canceled. A lot of people's lives ruined on January 6th, all because the American people believed the election was stolen. And it seems even more likely now as we look at this last election, 2024, just on the simple spike, John, in 2020. And, I had called you after the 2020 election, and I said, John, what happened? And you had intimated to me, John, you'd said, I'm not entirely sure about the electric thing, the electric voting machine. I don't know anything about that. You said, but what I'm going to tell you is that this seems like a good old-fashioned ballot stuffing operation.
That's right.
Turns out, you were very true, but we also don't know the other aspect, which is the electric voting machines, whatever. Do you think Donald Trump, we haven't heard anything about it yet over the last month and a week, about relitigating the 2020 election. Do you think we ever find out? No? You think
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think we're done with that. I think the president has 4 years to solve some of the largest crises Americans have ever faced. This inflation crisis is far from over. The debt crisis is a millstone around our neck. We've got 2 wars that need to be resolved, a government that needs to be broken down. And I think at the end of the day, Donald Trump's big change on elections occurred in December of 2022 when the Republicans underperformed for a second election. They didn't win as many seats as they thought. They didn't capture the Senate. And I think at that point, the president finally decided to get into the early voting game that Democrats had mastered. And I think you saw what happened. This time around, Donald Trump got 5, 6, 7 million Americans to vote early for the first time ever who hadn't voted in many cases. Like in the Lee Zeldin operation, like 4 million people who hadn't voted since 2016 voted early. And that's how you see the margins change. And you see the opposite thing happen with Democrats. If you're enthusiastic about your candidate or you hate the other candidate a lot, it's easy to get low propensity voters to vote early. But if you think your candidate is brain dead, i.e. Joe Biden, or just not presidential material, i.e. Kamala Harris, you can't get those people to vote early. And so the Democrat numbers dropped, and Donald Trump had everybody electrified. And then after the two assassination attempts, he reaches sort of almost mythical standards.
Yeah.
And the Republicans voted in numbers unseen in early voting in Republican Party history. I think that the president, I don't want to speak for him, but I think the president's team is convinced that early voting was a difference. Now, there's a lot of things that happened in 2020 that the Republicans should be ashamed of. They didn't contest things that they should have. They didn't look at things. Now, I went to two major ground zeros of the 2020 election, Wisconsin and Georgia. And I spent weeks and months, and I mean in the data like nobody. In some cases, I had every ballot of every voter in an entire city like Milwaukee, every single absentee ballot. And I called those people one by one by one, and I could not find, and I had a whole team doing this. The people who said they voted actually did vote. And the paper ballots match up pretty closely to, within a couple here and there, to the actual numbers that the machine spit out. So at least in the city of Milwaukee and in parts of Wisconsin where I delve in, and as you know, I did historic work on what happened in Atlanta. I found things that Brad Raffensperger had to go back and fix. But in both of those places, the paper ballots predominantly matched the final totals. Now, there was an error in the recount, and Brian Kemp, ultimately, who didn't buy any of this stuff, ultimately admitted there was an error in the recount, and it was a large error in the recount, several hundred votes, but it wasn't 7 or 8 or 10,000 to switch the election results. But it's a reminder that in these big blue areas, there is not only potential fraud, there is just really bad machinery, meaning not the machines, but the people. It's right. Just they don't hire quality people, or they don't have quality practices, and bad things happen. At the end of the day, I'm not sure we're going to learn something. Now, there's a really legitimate question that I think people can ask themselves, which is the Election Assistance Agency, EIA, I think it's called. They keep certifying these machines, and then after the election, it's like, oh, some of the things we said about the last machines aren't quite right, and they keep making changes to the machinery. And I think I could imagine someone in the next year say, the assurances we've been given about how locked down the machines are don't meet the test of a surety that we're given. So we vote, and then we find out after they weren't quite as secure as we thought. That doesn't mean that the machines were hijacked, but maybe they're not as perfect as they're made to be before the election. I could imagine someone filing a lawsuit in the next year saying, if the government keeps certifying machines and they don't live up to what the standards are, even if there's not cheating, is that good enough for America? And maybe challenging machine counting based on the lack of assurances that some of these post reviews have occurred and shown, there's been changes of things, people saying, oh, wait, we did find this full after the election. That is a lawsuit someone might want to do under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. I could imagine it. That's not a detriment to the machine companies. It's not an allegation that the machines were hijacked or did things, but it is the standard of these are really awesome machines. Is it really the right standard to apply to them? And if it's not, have we misled Americans when they vote? I could imagine someone going down that path. I don't know how the courts will rule, and I don't know how good the evidence is. I could imagine something like that, but I can't imagine someone going back and saying, I'm going to recount every ballot in Atlanta and find the missing votes. I did a lot of that myself, the old-fashioned way, and the tallies are pretty close, minus the changes I did find. I mean, the governor of Georgia, who claimed there was nothing wrong with Georgia, he admitted there was some miscounting, based on my reporting and some work by other people. So there were problems. The elections are not perfect, but I do think the largest thing that Republicans had to realize is they got beat on an early voting machine. And as soon as they started doing it, the Democrats can't keep up with Republicans. And I think Republicans are in very good shape long-term to win future elections, no matter what the election system is, whether it's machines, early voting, absentee voting. They got in the game. And the way I describe 2020 is if you were the Kansas City Chiefs, and he went into the Super Bowl and he said, I'm not going to use my wide receivers and running backs. I'm going to try to win without them. And you're like, why are you doing that? That's kind of what Republicans did. They said, well, we allowed absentee voting in really loose absentee voting, really loose rules to occur, and we didn't participate in it. Well, what do you think is going to happen? You tie a hand behind your back. They've changed that. And I think that the Republican Party is in extraordinary shape to win elections going forward, and whatever terms the election rules are on.
just to wrap up on that, there's an interesting case, which I'm sure you're familiar with, down in Georgia in front of Judge Amy Totenberg,
Sure.
in which they are challenging the plaintiffs to get rid of the voting systems that they use down there.
Yep.
And they brought in J. Alex Halderman to hack a machine.
Sure.
The guy did it with the ballpoint pen in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
And the interesting part about it, John,
that's the argument that I think that people are looking at. I think that's the argument people are looking at.
right? But we still don't have a ruling, John. This case has been going on for years.
Well, let's see if they move this into a different venue soon. I think you could imagine a state like Texas or a state like Montana maybe saying, been through enough here. I want to look at this, and maybe you get a faster docket. But I could imagine that type of argument proceeding, and I don't know where the evidence will go. I'm going to be honest. I don't know where the evidence will go, but I think that could be a legitimate debate that could play out in America, and we wouldn't be ashamed by it. But I do think the idea that we're going to go back and try to find the missing ballots in 2020. I think we moved past that.
We're the greatest country in the world, John.
We are.
I don't think it's too much to ask for just honesty, Yeah.
We're going to get a lot more of it. Listen, all the truths we were denied, we're getting a lot more truths for the first time. And I think we're starting to feel like the America of old for the first time. And I think that's a good thing for all of us.
Yeah. John Solomon, Just the News. You can catch him each and every night. Just the News, no noise on Real America's Voice. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks, my friend. Great to be with you today.
Thanks to John Solomon for taking the time to join us today, folks. Great American, really knows the stuff, really knows the documents, as he's been working on this for a very, very, very long time alongside the great Lou Dobbs. So we can't wait to speak with John again very, very soon. Folks, thank you all for joining us today as well. We hope to see you back here tomorrow for the Great America Show as our quest for truth, justice, and the American way continues. See you back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, may God bless you, may God bless America, and may God bless the great Lou Dobbs. We'll see you tomorrow, folks.